We're an inclusive membership organization. We're just under 1,000 members right now. We strive to bridge business and investment gaps on both sides of the Atlantic. Our commitment is to channel 50% of our investment into underrepresented communities of women. So far, we have invested anywhere from $40,000 to $5 million to date in our portfolio companies, and some of them have been donations. And we strive to continue to do more. Really, this is a way to get the entire society together, meet other women, meet other founding members, but also because our membership is inclusive, because you can't actually invest in women and talk about uplifting women if men are not brought to the table and participate in that discussion. And that's where we are here. We're super excited actually to have this event. Both Greta and I, we love this topic. We have a lot of PR gurus here. It hasn't been without crisis, this event, right? We are missing one panelist, Dr. Priya Vermani. Unfortunately, she's had some personal tragedy that she has to actually deal with and was unable to attend. And prior to Priya, we also had another crisis, and Emma came and saved the day.
Well, I haven't done it yet.
Well, you're here.
I'm sitting here.
You're here. And has stepped in graciously to be our moderator today. It is my honor to introduce Emma. She's a partner at Mishcon. Who doesn't know Mishcon? And she heads up the Reputation Protection and Crisis Management practice, and is outstanding in her field by recognized an outstanding person in her field by Spears Wealth Management Index for Reputation Protection Lawyers, and shortlisted as Spears Reputation Lawyer of the Year. Emma is described as a trusted advisor in Chambers and Partners and the Legal 500, the leading legal directories. For nearly 20 years, Emma has advised individual companies and charities on all aspects of media and reputation law, including defamation, breach of confidence, invasion of privacy, harassment, and data protection concerns. She's often called upon to advise in times of crisis and is quick to understand the bigger picture. We called her on crisis, so she definitely fits that bill. Emma provides claimants and defendants with pre- and post-client publication advice, including obtaining, defending, discharging injunctions. Her clients span a wide variety of geographies and industries, including media, technology, and financial services, politics, art, property, sport, fashion, education, and the charity sector. Emma takes a holistic approach to reputation protection, encouraging clients to prepare in advance of potential challenges and effectively mitigating any damage caused by negative publicity. That was a mouthful, Emma.
I'm sorry.
It was amazing. It was amazing. This is why it's been an honor to introduce you, and I'm going to give you so you can introduce the rest of the panel.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me. It's lovely. I am very interested in founders and entrepreneurship, the people behind the brand, and the way that crisis situations feel and are experienced by owner businesses. And so I was delighted when asked to step in. I wish that people did take my advice and prepare early. I wouldn't have all of the kind of busy days when we're just reacting. So maybe that's just the thing to encourage. So it's lovely to introduce the two of our three panelists. John Atchison, how do I say your name? Is that right?
Atchison.
Yeah, Atchison is a serial tech entrepreneur and the co-founder and CEO of Circular Way, which is a social enterprise dedicated to ending consumer waste by making circularity the foundation of everything that we buy. Prior to Circular Way and its predecessor company, Stuffster, John helped to launch Get Around, the world's leading peer-to-peer car sharing company. He served as the founder CEO of several media startups, including MusicNet, the first interactive music service. During the pandemic, John learned firsthand how it felt to wake up to a reputational crisis when Stuffster was forced to cease trading after its partner Adidas walked away from the agreements they had reached. He will talk about how that felt and what he learned. And it's not your usual gig to come and talk about your story.
That is correct.
So we're all going to be nice and kind and ask good questions, and thank you for doing that and being vulnerable and being able to do that. So to my far right, Laura Westmorcott, who I like because she's got a name that's nearly as difficult as mine, is the founder and MD of Mercury Communications, a PR agency working across all luxury lifestyle verticals, from real estate and hospitality to whiskey, luxury goods, and jewellery and watches. She's based in Berkeley Square, so about a stone's throw that way, and she has an in-depth knowledge of all things high net worth. She was formerly a TV news editor and has dealt with every crisis from the Arab Spring whilst working for the Bahrain Economic Development Board. There's a crisis. to murder, suicides, fire, and defamation, amongst other issues. I really like that you put defamation on the list with fire, death, suicide. Our reputations should be fiercely defended. We were going to be joined by Dr. Priya Vermani, who's going to talk about the psychology of crisis and leadership, fortifying yourself for crisis situations. And we, as you tend to, had a pre-call, and she was it is fantastic and cool, and you should hear her speak at something else. But knowing that she wasn't going to speak, we've all had a reflection on the elements that she was going to discuss and how we might be able to bring within our contributions what we've learnt of how people react in crisis situations. That was like, okay, good. So I'm going to kick off first by asking John to give us that founder's perspective, to talk a little bit about what it feels like to be in the eye of the storm, to be the founder, to be the name behind the brand, the investment, all the enterprise, and to suddenly feel a bit sick about things publicly being scrutinised and unravelling. So if you don't mind, there's a microphone.
Great. Thank you, Emma. So it's very nice to be here, and thank you to Carrie for inviting me to come along. It's really great setup and nice people. So I began working on a company called Stuffster back in 2014, often by having helped to launch this company Get Around that Emma mentioned, doing car sharing, and I had been getting increasingly focused on the waste in our society and how 70% of the things we buy end up going directly into landfill, even though about 90-some% of those things are totally usable. And it just seemed like there needs to be a better way. I founded Stuffster with the idea of fundamentally changing that flow. So from the very beginning, Stuffster was a very, very mission-driven organization. It was focused on really getting into consumers' minds and figuring out how to get people to think differently, behave differently, act differently. And it was a very long haul. We started in 2014. It wasn't until about 2018 that we actually got our first real success with John Lewis here in the UK, who had invited us to come over from the States and do a very successful pilot with them. And from that pilot, we had gotten to know Adidas. We were approached by Adidas, and they were very excited about what we've done and wanted to begin to incorporate circularity into their brand and make that a part of the whole Adidas identity. And so we began integrating our services into their platform. And just very quickly, what this was an interactive service that a customer could take the app of that retailer. They could then see all their previous purchases. Everything would be stamped with an instant sellback price, and you could literally just tap the things you were no longer using, and we would pay you instantly through an e-gift card, and we would come and haul the stuff away for free. And consumers loved this. It was a really big hit. And so we got this whole thing launched in the fall of 2019. And Adidas wanted it to grow very, very quickly. They wanted it to be global instantly, which of course is not possible working with a startup. But they stepped in and said, okay, we'll help, we'll bring management in, we'll put lots of money into this. And in a sense, we became at that point, not even completely knowingly at the time, completely dependent on them because they were the first partner, they were the only partner, they were just everything to us. So the service launched and it began to take off, and we were growing about 50% month over month at that point. And then the lockdown started. Adidas got into some financial problems. So 90% of their business at the time was wholesale, and so all the stores are closing, they had no cash flow, and they ultimately had to take a €3 billion bailout from the German government. And with that bailout, the Adidas board said, okay, we have to spend every penny of this public money on internal operations and jobs. All external projects are cut off. And at that point, they had been pushing us to grow, right? They wanted this as big as it could be, as quickly as it could be. And so on the promise that we have plenty of money, just grow, right? We'll keep you funded, we'll keep it going. And so we had essentially extended ourselves as there were these delays, and we're like, why is this money not coming? And then we get the word, oh, we're really, really sorry. The board's decided we're not going to do this at all. There's no more money in this project. And so we literally went from growing 50% month over month to 0 in 36 hours. And the concern for me with that, obviously it was an incredible personal blow because I put years into building this thing and suddenly it's just stopped all of a sudden. But there was also kind of a deeper concern, and that was that, this, as I said, was a very, very mission-driven organization. And we were doing things in a very kind of innovative, out there way that no one else was really pursuing. And there were a lot of people in the industry who were thinking, well, gosh, can that really work? Because we wanted to change the flow. And we thought the way to do that is with these, systems and processes that we're putting into place. And my fear was that by suddenly having this stop, that there would be a broad-based assumption that that model didn't work, when in fact it had been working really, really well. I guess along with that concern about the model was that, in a sense, Stuffster had been it's like an evangelical platform, right? Because it got a lot of attention. A lot of people in the industry wanted to know what we were doing. I got invited to a lot of speaking engagements and was able to really, really push the idea of circular economy and why that made sense and why that was a good business model and why it was better for both companies and the planet. And suddenly that was in grave jeopardy, that this was going to disappear somehow. And so it was a really, really difficult time. And it all happened so suddenly. And it was, I think, a real test for me personally, and certainly for the whole business, about how do we respond to this? How do we actually come out of this and preserve that mission and keep this mission going, even though the company can no longer be?
Do you want to talk a little bit about how that felt? You said it was very challenging, but how did you kind of bring yourself back to, right, I'm going to start strategizing the response? How did you dig deep? What sort of things did you prioritize in that 36 hours?
Well, you have to remember the context, right? So we had a company, and we had people working for that company, and we had a lot of obligations as a company. And so in many ways, my very first response was, how do I protect the employees, right? How do I get them to have, because they're losing their jobs. We've got to find out what we can do to try to protect these people. And then secondly, I had to be thinking from a fiduciary responsibility that, when something like that happens, we were overextended. So we had creditors, we had all these things going on. You have to be on it, right? I mean, you have to be handling those situations in an absolutely correct, by the book way. Mm-hmm. And you've got a board of directors, not all of whom are as engaged. They just want to get out at that point, right? And you're saying, no, you can't do that. We have to go through these processes. So those things immediately were what kind of consumed me. But I had this, just enormous concern about what I was just talking about. How do we continue this mission? How do we preserve what we're trying to accomplish here? So after kind of working with employees, working with the board, all of that, I began going through a process of trying to engage the key influencers that we had known and worked with over that period of time, because I wanted them to understand what had gone on here. And I didn't want this narrative to get out there that, oh, did you see, Stuffster didn't make it, so doing things in an easier and less impactful way actually makes sense now. You shouldn't try to tell this far forward. And so I was immediately thinking of who do I need to talk to bring that in. And I think one of the things that made this challenging was that we had this very, very big partner that was having their own crisis management going on. And for them, within our band of the industry, in other words, the sustainability world, they didn't want to look like they were abandoning this. They didn't overtly come out and say, oh, well, the business wasn't working, but they kind of didn't contradict that assumption either. Yeah. Right? Because they didn't want to go into it. They didn't want to say, well, no, actually, we totally pulled the plug on these guys.
Mm-hmm. They couldn't protect you from this?
At all. No. It made it harder. And so we were kind of battling that as well.
Yeah. Laura, when we were talking previously, you talked quite a lot about the ability to be able to quickly prioritize the stakeholders, control the message. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you prepare businesses and founders for the unexpected happening and those first couple of hours when something kicks off?
Yeah. First of all, just a quick sort of add-on to your story. We firmly believe that you can't stay silent. It's about, as a founder, as C-suite, to come out and actually express. I mean, if you don't have an answer, at least express something to say you're looking into it, or it's with deep regret, or with just show remorse, show feeling, show being human. And I think as a founder, there's a lot of big corporate brands, and as we know, as we're sort of evolving over the last 5-10 years, there's a sort of move away from those big corporates, and we want to go to sort of friendly, smaller businesses. And I think we want to see, so those big corporates have to now come out with the CEO saying something, saying I'm sorry. A bit like sort of P&O was one of the kind of things I was looking at earlier today as the kind of most recent, just horrendous situation of what was that PR person thinking in terms of pre-recording a message to get rid of that many people. And actually I tried to look online to see if they've done anything since to rebuild, because obviously a crisis is not about the crisis, and to your question you were asking me about the preparation, it's not about actually the moment the crisis happens, because it should have been weeks, months, years before that the whole sort of stakeholder grouping should have been kind of looked at. And that's not just internal comms, that's external comms, because I think when you think of your PR agency or maybe your internal person that deals with marcoms, you're thinking, gosh, they're just dealing with the media and the sort of external perception, but actually don't forget your internal employees are your front line. We dealt with one situation with one particular brand that had huge fulfillment issues just prior to Christmas, not this year but the year before, so deep into COVID. All the sort of products were being dumped into warehouses but not put away, so none of these people were going to get their Christmas presents. Trustpilot was at 1.4. What are those guys going to do moving forward? They can address with all of those customers that aren't getting their Christmas presents. They can deal with the website. They can deal with, obviously customer service has to be briefed. So all that sort of key messaging that a PR company puts together needs to be thought of on the spot. But then I think there's a lot that we can do ahead of that by thinking, what are the likely problems? What could go wrong? And I've certainly worked with some clients where I've drafted holding statements for every single situation within a crisis handbook, and then sort of mapping which are the most likely in order, and making sure that the sort of chain of command, is it your head of comms that's going to be the first person that's called? Who is it? What are their phone numbers? Do we know what's going to happen? So there's no dithering, and everything's already been sort of mapped out. And then, sorry to go on to post already and jump ahead, but then once you've done the do, it's looking at, how well did we do in various different elements, and kind of, marking it from 1 to 10 and understanding where you're going to have to delve deeper and build with certain campaigns to regrow that trust from your consumers. Because we talked a little bit before actually, and I know it's one of your key love words, but resilience. So I think it depends what brand you are. I think as a startup it's pretty tricky. As Adidas, you'll get over it. People have a love and have memories, and I always like to use sort of, I don't know, whether it's ketchup, it sits on a British dining room table for years and years and years. If ketchup poisons someone one day, we'll get over it. We'll get over it because we love ketchup. Whereas unfortunately, if you're a startup and you do something tragic, it's not ideal. And I give another example. We've got one client, actually, and again, your favourite topic, defamation, who had a horrible blog written about him. It was on Google page 1. What do you do? Well, it's not actually Mercury, but there are other, we could work very hard on getting lots of stories out there on different topics to flush that through to sort of lower pages. But actually there's one particular agency who's very well known in the UK who does sort of dark arts in terms of flushing. Oh, is this where?
The microphone turned off as soon as we said dark arts.
Hello, dark arts. So there's one particular agency that really is adept at when it's really difficult issues and will flush. Don't know what they do, but anyway, they do that. But this one particular guy, we went to a defamation lawyer and we got this particular blog taken down, and we fought him tooth and nail, because what it meant for him was no fundraising. Every single journalist that we tried to do a profiling piece with him, they'd see that and then want to go down this dark route of very negative press. So then we could no longer even pitch this client. It was absolutely impossible. And just going back to the sort of CEO coming out and doing it the right way on P&O, Brewdog was another one that we were looking at earlier, and it's one of my favourite examples, and I'm sure a lot of you know it. But James Watts, the CEO, went out on BBC after this 60 employees said that it was a toxic work environment and horrific, and how did he come back from that? So rather than writing that sort of really bland, vanilla corporate statement that the PR agency could write and then hiding and putting your head in the sand, he went out there and said, look, hands up, it wasn't good, I'm going to improve, I've taken this on board. So I think that's a really, really important thing, is for a founder to just take the bull by the horns, and it's not hide behind the PR agency writing holding statements, because that's a really easy thing, and we see that time and time again. And then the other sort of part of something we've been talking about was trying to split brand and founder. Not often, I have seen particular people where a CEO is looking for his next job, and he realises that this is hugely damaging for his career progression. He'll hide behind the brand rather than obviously putting himself front and centre, which again is the wrong thing to do, because actually, conversely, it makes him look very weak and not true to the situation. Yeah.
You've talked quite a bit about the different points. You talked a little bit about the chronology of crisis management and the preparedness and the reaction. I want to go back in time and talk a bit more about resilience and building resilience and the things that people can do proactively ahead of a crisis situation to feel more comfortable and more confident reacting. You talked a bit about doing stakeholder mapping and making sure you know all the right people to call in a crisis and what the leadership chain is and that sort of thing. I wondered if, John, you could reflect on the things that you learned that you might have done differently, perhaps not just having all your eggs in one basket and one partner, in terms of the things that you think that you might say to someone who was starting out that might have helped when you were dealing with a crisis situation.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously there is that business lesson that don't get all your eggs in one basket like that. But
It was a great partner.
Yeah.
Not many people foresaw there was going to be a pandemic.
Sure. But looking back on it, there was more that we could have done, I think, to have, from a mission standpoint, have really kind of laid the groundwork for how we were approaching things. I mean, people knew what we were doing, but they didn't really know why we were doing it necessarily, and what was kind of unique about that, and how that all fit together. And I think we could have been much more proactive in working with publishing things, be it LinkedIn articles or whatever, but influencing influencers so that they were fully informed on what the basis of the company was in our approach, so that when this happened, I didn't have to worry about it being so closely associated with the business and people thinking, oh, if the business didn't make it, the model must not have worked. I think that would have helped. I think the other thing I could have done was that we had this period where we kept expecting to get this money. It's like, oh, well, we can't do that yet. It's like, why not? Right? Why is this stretching out? I'm not sure I can really blame myself for it at the time, because we didn't really know what was going to happen. But I think it would have been very helpful if I had begun to engage some of these influencers at that time, just to say, oh, this is going on, and it's such a weird time, isn't it, with all these lockdowns, or something that kind of almost kind of laid the seeds for what became the narrative after this all happened.
Yeah.
Because that probably could have been done, but I mean, it would have taken a fair amount of foresight, but I think it could have been done.
Because I was actually just going to say, there was nothing for you to be embarrassed about. Like, everyone was about to go through similar kind of tragedies of differing scales.
Yeah, but I think what was unique here was that, in general, what we were pursuing was kind of counter-cyclical, right? And so most resale businesses were taking off during this time, as we had been, right? Because people were thinking, oh my gosh, I can't work, but I've got these clothes I can sell, yeah. I can make this money. And so the tide was rising quickly for the whole industry, and suddenly we disappeared.
I might abuse the chair's privilege. One of the things that I encourage people to do early is to think about the tricky issues and document stuff. It's always like, agreements. But talking, I advise a lot of kind of founders and co-founders who find that if there's a challenge along the way, they wish they had talked through how they were going to resolve conflict between themselves, how they were going to ensure that there were clear lines of command in a crisis. So thinking through, just having a good, thorough shareholders agreement, thinking about how, what you're going to do when you reach deadlock, who you're going to go to, but also thinking about documenting how you've made decisions and why. So, there are always tricky issues about looking down your supply chain, or how you've mitigated risk, and how you've balanced competing issues. And if you minute why you've made the decisions and how you've found comfort and why you found comfort, if you later are scrutinised about it, you can go back and you've got the arguments there about why it was rational and what you considered. So rather than reacting in the heat of a crisis situation, you can go back to, that was a sensible decision for these reasons. In every board meeting or any time you're making a decision, stop and think, well, we know this made sense. If I were a Daily Mail headline writer, how could I turn this around? Okay, no, this is the response. So in the same way as Laura was talking about creating holding statements for every situation, when you make a challenging decision, document why you reach that decision, why you're satisfied, why it accords with your core values, why it makes sense. Because it makes it a lot easier to respond when someone says, nah, why? You know, I know why, and I stand by it.
I was just going to say, don't see the media as an adversary. See it as an opportunity. See it as an opportunity to fill those media pages, because they're going to write something. And if you're not speaking, the other person that you're in battle with will be filling those airwaves and those pages. Again, it's not a corporate example, but sorry, I just wanted to have fun examples for an evening event. Colin the Caterpillar that we all love at M&S. As we all know, Aldi came out with this character called Cuthbert, which was obviously a travesty, and they went through a massive lawsuit off the back of that they'd obviously blatantly copied M&S. And so then this big sort of media thing erupted on Twitter with Free Cuthbert, and this just gained such traction because everyone wanted to free Cuthbert. Wasn't it awful that Cuthbert wasn't allowed to be alive, that Cuthbert had to die because Aldi had committed an offence. So I think, sometimes, I'm not saying every time it's necessary, and I think something else we've sort of been thinking about today was, you always have to be authentic to your brand. Is this the right thing to do? And we've got sort of one phrase, in fact my husband at work, he always says, is there an upside? If there's no upside, don't do it. So for example, during recent weeks with the Queen, there's been a lot of naughty brands sort of feeling that they have to just say something. You don't actually have to say something if it's not right. So for example, Anne Summers had put pictures of the Queen alongside lots of unmentionable items, which didn't sort of really work. And the likes of Legoland and Playmobil had done sort of plastic versions of the Queen, which was really quite distasteful and not well received. So I guess don't feel you just have to jump off the back of a news peg to fill silence, but don't be afraid to fill silences either. I think you have to use a bit of common sense. I think as much as you can create rule books and all of these things to make yourself feel comfortable, you're human. Use your common sense. Hopefully we're all intelligent people.
Very good advice. And also, listen on social media. The brands that I see doing really, really well, listen and respond and take note of how the public receives me. I had a question for you. Do you have a husband at home and a husband at work? You said your husband at work says.
And then you can ask my two colleagues how that works.
Okay, that leads me on to
conversation for later.
Okay, so private life, public profiles. We've talked quite a bit about founders, the distinction between brand and personality, and you mentioned that CEOs sometimes looking for the next job or focus on themselves rather than the dying brand. I think I went in, we had Mel C in our office this week because we're not a normal law firm, and I asked the first question because I'm a diehard Spice Girls fan, because I heard an interview where she talked about going to the gym really early in the morning to open the tabloids and see the bizarre column and see how they're being written about, and if they weren't being written about, to panic either way. And I remember growing up thinking, girl power, individuality, oh my god, they're being ripped apart, and their relationships are being scrutinised, and what a position to be in. And I told her, I'm not sure it's really true, but it worked for the session. I said to her, I think maybe you were the beginning of why I do what I do. I believe that human beings are entitled to have a public profile and have opinions on things, but also have a private life. That you can open up and you can speak about certain things, but you can go home and close the door, and that's sacred. I'm always quite interested in founders and the amount to which it's important to put a personality around a brand and open up and expose. And I wonder whether both of you can reflect and talk about where you draw lines, how you sense where the comfort level lies, and whether you've ever felt like you're overexposed, or whether there's pressure to open up more. I'm going to go to John first.
I guess my initial response to this, I wish that we were so much in the spotlight that I have to worry regularly about those kinds of things. But for what we were doing, it seemed important that my personal story of kind of bringing that together was necessary to put out there because it did lend authenticity to what we were doing. And so there was this kind of connection being spun between me and my work with sustainability in the States. I chaired a sustainability think tank, I'd done those kinds of things, and I felt we needed to kind of have that representation. I'm not sure that's always true. And it wasn't a situation where there was so much kind of public notice on it that it put me in some, position similar to the one you described, right? I didn't have people kind of stalking my house. It wasn't that kind of thing. But it did tie with what happened to the business. Absolutely affected me personally, and my concern about being able to go raise venture funding for what has now become Circular Way as a follow-on, carry-on of that mission.
And those are challenging conversations when people connect you to one brand, and you have to be able to try and distance yourself from Adidas and move forward.
Well, yes, and especially when you're essentially trying to carry on the same mission, right? I mean, it would have been easier in a sense if I just stopped that and gone into burgers or something.
But you're never really asked why and what the motivation. I suppose that yours is more of a kind of professional story, so people aren't really interested in the why and the person behind.
They weren't particularly interested in the person behind in that sense, right? I mean, they weren't. No one was really that interested in how it affected me, and that was fine. That wasn't the core focus for me, right? I didn't sense that. I didn't feel that people were kind of looking at it from the standpoint of, oh, what about him, or how does it, what's his role in that? But it absolutely affected me in my ability to go out and meet with venture capitalists and get industry people involved and all those kinds of things that you very much into account.
Nora, do you see conflict between the personal brand and the private life, people wanting to open up too much, not enough?
I think it's interesting. We're an agency that obviously can cover off sort of corporate stories in the business press, and they don't necessarily pry as much into all the sort of lifestyle elements, I guess, of someone's life. However, in the lifestyle press, they want to know all the nitty gritty, and they want to do the sort of at-home pieces, and they want to know the whole thing. And then we've got some clients who love that, and some clients who are strictly business only. I mean, if I had my personal way, I'd love for them all to be super open, as long as they're squeaky clean and don't have skeletons in their cupboards.
Humans are flawed.
But I think being human with a journalist, definitely, and developing a rapport is another thing. If it's a sort of one-on-one interview, if you're a closed book and you don't open up to those people, they're not probably going to write the best piece. But if you can curate your sort of, hey, warts and all, this is all of me, but you can always keep the bits back that you want to keep back. So I think it's about sort of enhancing and polishing the bits at home. So we were providing it elsewhere. It led to, in fact I wrote a figure down here because I knew I wouldn't remember, it led to sort of 96 pieces of coverage, circulation over 1 billion, little old us sitting on Berkeley Square had calls from ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, CNN, the whole sort of gamut of, that was just America. So that was quite extraordinary, and this guy had, 2,000 inquiries straight off the back of that, a 15% increase in sales, etc., etc. But is the ongoing brand damaged by, because obviously that was a Marmite thing to do. Some people thought it was great, but obviously Rich getting things that other people can't is not great in a lot of people's eyes. So that's a difficult sort of conundrum, and that was hard for us, and it led to a lot of prying eyes and sort of investigative journalists checking us out, thinking there was more that we were doing that was wrong, and sort of having to be on guard and protect the private life of the client as well, because it was attritional. Just like you described, it was really attritional over the course of a few months.
Who doesn't have lots of money to spend on lawyers and PR, but who could think about how they can retain a bit of control or confidence that they are prepared for a crisis?
Yeah, I think, from my standpoint, and this is coming within the context of being very mission-driven, right, and trying to pursue this mission, and the company is a vehicle for trying to pursue that mission. But, the one thing that I think we did that I'm thankful for is that I think we did build a lot of credibility along the way leading up to that. And so when I did have these conversations with influencers within the industry after this blew up, they did listen, right? They were...
You knew who your friends were?
Yes, but they also thought, okay, this guy, has really been dedicated to this cause, right? He's been really straight with me for a long time, so he must be being straight with me now. And I think that paid a lot of dividends. And so I would encourage anybody starting a business to, you've got, get any kind of startup going, you've got to project, right? You kind of fake it till you make it and all that kind of thing. But you've got to have a foundation of credibility. You've got to be able to go and be authentic and talk from the heart and talk about these are the challenges and this is what's going well. And get people to feel that you're being straight with them and get them to have that expectation from you.
I was going to say, we haven't sort of focused on this too much in terms of the evolution of sort of social media and the fact that, anyone can say anything against you. So I guess having a really tight social media kind of policy and knowing what you do and don't want to say would be number one, even because you have to, that's your only way to communicate real time, and you have to communicate real time because in the past we could have waited till the 6 o'clock or the 10 o'clock news on BBC and everyone sat down and listened. But now it's you've got to think adeptly, quickly on your feet. And I guess the other thing to say in terms of founders, because not everyone has the opportunity to hire even a freelance PR or let alone an agency. So I guess this is not rocket science. PR is not rocket science. So I think it's about, because you can self-broadcast, as it were, now, so on many different channels. So I think it's about doing exactly what we've talked about today, and it's that stakeholder mapping and understanding and also who your kind of advocates and loyal supporters are, and making sure you know all of them as well as your kind of potential adversaries. And then, mapping out all those likely kind of things that might go wrong, and maybe actually you could go and deal with them before they do go wrong, because oh my God, that fire could break out or that product could go wrong. Well, nail it now, because you just figured that out by sitting down and thinking about the potential risks of everything, which we don't ever sit down and do, and then they come to Emma and it's really gone wrong.
So most of my work, they come to me in a crisis and I go, right, we've sorted that problem. And then I'm like, shall we sit down and talk about what's really worrying you? So I get the kind of preparedness stuff after the crisis. Yeah. So they really, because human nature is to bury your head in the sand. So you need a little crisis, or your peers or competitors have a crisis to get people really focused.
It's additional spend. It doesn't ever, normally it doesn't come in a typical retainer fee. So clearly people aren't going to go that extra mile usually until they've witnessed it firsthand, and then they will invest.
Or they have a Ned or someone who says, we need to get ahead of this, or there are issues here we need to address, and then they can. So I'm reading the room, I'm wondering whether people have burning questions, or whether actually, I think because we're all going to stay around, shall we mingle and ask questions direct to people rather than... Oh, there is a question.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Andrew. My name is Andrew. I work as a marketer, digital marketer for 12 years. Different topics, business, personal brands, Web3 right now. And I work always with PR, like agencies, with some great PR companies and some other. And I see that marketing is right now like all like from what visit card we have till digital advertising, Facebook, Instagram, growth, followers and others. And I built before a lot of huge influencers from 0 to 600,000 followers and some other. And I'm looking for right now for which you think main trend for PR will for next year. We spoke about social media, influencers already, but maybe you see some specialized what we need to focus on with our clients right now, because we work with different business, like jewelry, experts of sport and some other. What we should to see, maybe focus on events offline, focus on like community management, focus on digital marketing more featured by some so great magazines. Yeah, what do you think about it? So main trend for nearest time, let's say like this, okay? Thank you so much.
I should be saying PR in its pure traditional sense, but I mean obviously digital marketing in terms of direct sales is where it's at right now, and social media for sure, but it's a whole integrated mix of everything, including, we don't like to talk about influencers too much, we talk about tastemakers, people with real jobs and who have real influences that, so in particular in a sort of high net worth circle or investment circles, I want the private banker that can bring me 4 people to a dinner rather than paying for 100 people to have free champagne and canapes for fun. because that doesn't give me any ROI. And then in terms of topics, if I may, we obviously have a complete focus on everything ESG, of course, which will be no surprise to you. And then for us as well, metaverse. And I guess metaverse comes with, one of the other topics that I was thinking about today was sort of, data breaches and GDPR. And I mean, from a legal standpoint, what does the metaverse bring you, Emma?
So much to talk about. That's a whole other thing. I think women in the metaverse, that's what we need to talk about. If women don't understand why it's relevant and what advantage there is to engaging, it will continue to develop in a very male-dominated way, and it will become less and less interesting and less creative in a way that's accessible.
Carrie will be running a talk on that next
No. We're doing an event around misogyny in the metaverse in February.
I'm trying to look if Daria is still here. But that's exactly what her and I talked about yesterday.
Really?
Like literally yesterday.
Okay, we need to talk about this. So it's another event. You're
Yes.
all welcome. But no, the metaverse is huge. It's an alternative reality with no law.
Yeah.
So people are being really pervy and weird.
It's like the Wild Wild West.
Yeah, well, it's what we used to say of the internet, but we have to start kind of gaining some control now, otherwise it just goes careering off.
Yeah, I had a question.
Okay.
But I was thinking about some of the big founder disasters. Travis Kalanick and Uber, sexism, racism, has to leave. The WeWork guy tanks his company, runs off to Israel. Both of them lie low, have now got new ventures, masses of new founding. The other side, someone like Elizabeth Holmes, very similar, gets caught out. Her defense is, I'm a victim of coercive control. It was all a man, it's me, not me rather. So I wonder, when you're dealing with crises and also when you're positioning your clients anyway, how much do you factor gender into how they should present themselves to the press, how contrite they should be? Because he looked like Travis Kalanick's rolling like he's God. Women don't get that sort of same hall pass. So yeah, how do you factor that into your strategies in crisis and in forward planning?
We've got one client who, this is not in a direct answer to what you're asking, but she wants to turn up in sort of stilettos on a building site despite health and safety, and she wants to be photographed, wearing
Is it Karen
that.
Brady?
No, it's not. But at first I was like, no, I don't want you to do that, because this is not, as women, as in construction, and you're trying to sort of put forward a message, and this is not the message that we want to put forward. But actually she persuaded me, and she goes, no, but this is what I'm about, and I want to show that I don't need to turn up in a freaking black suit and put my building boots on and my high vis. And I'm like, actually, okay, you've got personality. That comes back to the persona. That didn't sort of answer your question, but I guess it shouldn't make any difference. It shouldn't be a question, maybe.
Women in a crisis are called out for being shrill. The way that you respond is often the next line of attack. So I think it is very gendered, and I think the best you can do is just be aware of it. So I think it is just about trying to be prepared, trying to get people aware that it will happen. A lot of it is personality driven. It's interesting that the stories you talk of men who rise from the flames and pretend it never happened, and they find it slightly easier to do. All these things, all these aspects of a personality come into it. But I think being aware of it and being aware that it feeds into how you're received and maybe the goodwill that you do or don't have, I think it's important. So it always should stay on the list of things that you consider.